I'm Elena, 29, female, and my family, who once told me to fix my face, not computers, is now begging me for rent money after I sold my code for $2.8 million. It's funny how a seven-figure bank deposit can suddenly make your entire life's work, once a source of family ridicule, look like a stroke of genius they all secretly believed in. But I have a long memory. A memory filled with the echoes of their laughter, the sting of their words, and the profound loneliness of being the family's resident weirdo. Their sudden change of heart isn't just too little, too late. It's an insult to the girl they tried so hard to break. My family operates on a simple, unspoken principle. Appearances are everything. We were a portrait of suburban success, living in a meticulously kept two-story house with a manicured lawn my father, Robert, tended to with religious fervor. My mother, Sharon, was the director of this stage play. Her hair was always perfectly coiffed, her outfits tastefully expensive, and her social calendar filled with luncheons and charity events that were more about being seen than being charitable. My brother, Kyle, was their star actor. 2 years my junior, he was blessed with the kind of effortless charm and conventional good looks that our parents understood and valued. He was the captain of the soccer team, the prom king, the guy who could talk his way into anything. He was their golden child, a walking, talking reflection of all their hopes. And then there was me. I was the backstage crew, the lighting technician, the scriptwriter nobody ever read. From a young age, my passion wasn't for people, but for patterns. I didn't want to go to parties. I wanted to understand the logical architecture that made the world work. This fascination led me to the glowing screen of our family's bulky desktop computer, a machine my parents bought as a stylish piece of office furniture but rarely touched. For me, it was a gateway to another universe, a universe of code. This universe, however, was completely alien to my family, and they treated my fascination with it as a strange and embarrassing affliction. My teenage years were particularly brutal. I was a late bloomer, contending with a cascade of hormonal changes that manifested in a constellation of acne across my face. It was a difficult time for any teenager, but in a family obsessed with image, it was a cardinal sin. My mother's attempts to help were laced with a unique brand of cruelty. She wouldn't just buy me expensive skincare products, she would present them to me at the dinner table, in front of everyone. "Elena, darling," she'd say, holding up a tiny, clinical-looking bottle. "Let's try to get this situation under control. It's so distracting." The worst of it came on a Saturday afternoon when I was about 16. I had just spent 8 hours straight, fueled by soda and a bag of chips, finally cracking a piece of code for a small game I was designing. I was ecstatic, my mind buzzing with the thrill of creation. I ran downstairs to grab another drink, my face flushed with excitement, probably looking a mess. My mother was in the living room with Kyle, flipping through a magazine. She looked up at me, and her perfectly painted smile tightened into a grimace of distaste. "My goodness, look at you," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "You spend all day locked in that dark room, staring at that screen. It's not healthy. You should be out with friends, enjoying the sunshine." I tried to explain my breakthrough, the joy of solving a complex problem. "But Mom, I finally got the character animation to work. It's..." She cut me off, waving a dismissive hand. "Elena, I don't want to hear about your little computer games." She stood up and walked over, tilting my chin up to the light, scrutinizing my face as if it were a flawed piece of merchandise. "You need to fix your face, not computers. No one is going to care how clever you are if they can't stand to look at you." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was such a direct, callous blow that it left me speechless. I looked over at Kyle, hoping for even a flicker of support, but he just snickered, burying his face in a couch cushion to muffle his laughter. My father walked in at that moment, saw the scene, and just gave a weak, uncomfortable chuckle. "Now, Sharon," he mumbled, "be nice." But there was no force behind it. He was, as always, a passive spectator in his own family. That comment became a defining moment. Fix your face, not computers. It was the perfect encapsulation of their entire worldview. My internal world, my intellect, my passion, it was all worthless. All that mattered was the shell, the facade, I didn't cry in front of them. I turned around, walked back up to my room, and closed the door. The glow of the monitor felt like my only friend. That night, I didn't fix my face. I poured my hurt and anger into my code, making it sharper, cleaner, and more powerful. This dynamic played out time and time again. At family gatherings, my achievements were footnotes, while Kyle's were headlines. When I won a state-level award for a science fair project, a rudimentary search algorithm, my parents smiled politely and put the certificate in a drawer. A few weeks later, when Kyle was named Salesman of the Month at the car dealership where he had a summer job, they threw a celebratory dinner. "Now that's a useful skill," my father beamed, raising a glass. "Knowing how to deal with people, how to make a sale, that's what gets you ahead in the real world, son." The implication was clear. What I did was not part of the real world. It was a hobby, a childish diversion. During one particularly memorable Thanksgiving, my uncle asked me what I was studying in college. When I said computer science with a focus on machine learning, he looked baffled. Kyle, ever the charmer, jumped in. "It means she likes to argue with the toaster," he said, and the table erupted in laughter. My mother patted my hand. "She's always been our little nerd," she said, as if it were an affectionate nickname and not a brand of dismissal. Even their financial support was divided along these lines of perceived value. They co-signed a loan for Kyle's first flashy sports car, arguing that image is important in real estate. They paid for his tailored suits, his expensive dinners with clients, his vacations. They were investing in the son who reflected their values back at them. Meanwhile, my requests were met with skepticism. My college textbooks were a shocking expense. The software I needed for my advanced courses was an unnecessary luxury. I worked part-time jobs, saved every penny, and built my own world, brick by digital brick, without any of their help. They saw it as proof of my strangeness. I saw it as the foundation of my independence. They didn't realize they weren't just denying me their resources, they were freeing me from any obligation to them. They were so busy mocking the caterpillar, they never stopped to think what the butterfly might become. The seed of what would become my $2.8 million algorithm was planted during my junior year of college. It was born not in a flash of genius, but in the dull ache of frustration. I was working a tedious part-time job at a campus warehouse, logging inventory for the university bookstore. The system was archaic, a mess of conflicting spreadsheets, manual data entry, and pure guesswork. Shipments would get lost, orders would be duplicated, and entire pallets of books would sit in a corner, unaccounted for, until they were obsolete. It was inefficient, and it drove me crazy. But where others saw chaos, I started to see a pattern. The problem wasn't the people or the products, it was the flow of information. It was a data problem, and data problems, I knew, could be solved with elegant code. For weeks, I spent my nights not on my coursework, but on this side project. I started sketching out a system that didn't just track inventory but could predict it. It would analyze past sales data, course enrollment numbers, professor book lists, and even secondary market prices to create a dynamic model of supply and chain. It was ambitious, far beyond anything I had built before. It was the first project that felt less like an assignment and more like a calling. After 3 months of theoretical work, I had a solid framework. But to build a functional prototype, I needed more than my aging laptop could provide. I needed a powerful server to handle the data processing, specialized software licenses, and access to larger databases for testing. I did the math, scrounging for student discounts and open-source alternatives wherever I could. The bare minimum I needed to give this idea a real shot was $5,000. To me, it felt like a fortune, but I knew who had that kind of money. Asking my parents for it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It felt like walking willingly into the lion's den, holding a piece of meat and hoping they wouldn't bite my hand off. I prepared for it like a business pitch. I put together a 10-page proposal, complete with market analysis, a projected timeline, and a breakdown of every single expense. I rehearsed my speech, trying to frame it in language they would understand, words like efficiency, investment, and marketable. I drove home one weekend and sat them down in the living room, the same room where my mother had criticized my face years before. My hands trembled slightly as I passed them copies of my proposal. My father, Robert, put on his reading glasses and scanned the first page with a deep frown, as if he were examining a losing stock report. My mother, Sharon, didn't even look at it. She just stared at me, her expression a mixture of impatience and pity. So, I began, my voice shakier than I wanted. I have this project I've been working on. It's a logistics optimization system. I think it has real potential. Al, it could be used by any company that manages a large inventory. Warehouses, retail chains, shipping companies. My father grunted, flipping a page. Logistics, right. I've hit a wall with my current equipment, I pressed on, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I need to invest in some better hardware and software to build a working model. I've calculated everything, and I need about $5,000 to move forward. Silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder than ever. Finally, my father took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was the gesture he always made before delivering bad news. Elena, he said with a heavy sigh, you're a smart girl, we know that, but you live in this world of theory. This is a lot of money to pour into a what if. What happens when it doesn't work out? What happens when the next shiny idea comes along? This isn't just a shiny idea, I insisted, my voice rising. This is a real-world application. It solves a tangible problem. My mother finally spoke, her voice smooth and dismissive. Darling, your father is right. It sounds very complicated and very risky. You should be focusing on your studies, on getting good grades so you can get a stable job at a good company. Something with a pension, not this. She gestured vaguely at my proposal as if it were a dirty napkin. A stable job won't be as valuable as owning my own intellectual property, I argued, feeling the familiar frustration welling up. This is an investment, in me, in my future. My father shook his head, a look of finality on his face. I'm sorry, Elena, it's just not a smart use of money. It's like throwing good money after bad. We can't do it. We can't do it, he said, but what I heard was, we don't believe in you. The proposal in my hands suddenly felt foolish and naive. I had tried to meet them on their terms, to speak their language of money and practicality, and they had still shut me down. The very next weekend, the sting of that rejection was doused in salt. I was home again, a mandatory appearance for a family barbecue. As I was nursing a drink on the back patio, my parents and Kyle came out of the garage, their faces lit up with excitement. Parked in the driveway was a brand-new metallic blue convertible. It wasn't just any car, it was a status symbol, a gleaming testament to their priorities. What do you think, Allie? Kyle crowed, jingling the keys. A little signing bonus to myself for landing the gig at Henderson Properties. My mother beamed, running a hand along the car's fender. We wanted to help him get started on the right foot, she announced to the assembled aunts and uncles. You know what they say, you have to look the part to be the part. Image is so important in his field. My father clapped Kyle on the back, his chest puffed out with pride. He's going to be a star, a real mover and shaker. This is an investment in his future. An investment, the same word I had used. They had thrown tens of thousands of dollars at a depreciating asset for my brother, a tool for his image, while they had refused me a fraction of that for something I was building from scratch, something with real, tangible value. I stood there, invisible, watching them fawn over Kyle and his new toy. The injustice of it was a physical weight in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about the validation. They saw Kyle's path, superficial, materialistic, and conventional, as a sure bet. They saw my path, intellectual, innovative, and unconventional, as a worthless gamble. That was the moment the last thread of hope I had for their approval finally snapped. I didn't need their belief anymore. Their dismissal wasn't a verdict on my worth. It was a reflection of their own limitations. I looked at the shiny blue car, at my brother's smug face, and at my parents' proud smiles, and I felt a strange sense of calm. They had made their investment. Now it was time for me to double down on mine. That night, I went back to my tiny college apartment, took out a high-interest student credit card, and bought the server. The debt felt cold and terrifying, but it was mine. Every dollar of it was a declaration of independence. The years that followed my parents' rejection were a blur of caffeine, code, and carefully calculated debt. Graduating from college wasn't a triumphant march into a high-paying corporate job, as my parents had hoped. It was a quiet transition from a cramped dorm room to a slightly larger, but significantly gloomier basement apartment. The rent was cheap for a reason. The plumbing gurgled at all hours, the single window looked out onto a concrete wall, and the air always carried a faint, damp chill. But it had reliable electricity and a high-speed internet connection, which was all that mattered. My world shrank to the size of my monitor screen. I took a soul-crushing day job doing tech support for an insurance company. It was a monotonous loop of resetting passwords and calmly explaining to panicked users that no, they hadn't deleted the internet. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills. It covered my rent, my utilities, and the minimum payments on the credit card I'd used to buy my server, which hummed away in a corner of my apartment like a loyal, power-hungry pet. Every evening, I'd come home, make a pot of coffee, and my real work would begin. My life was a study in contrasts. By day, I was a low-level employee in a vast corporate machine, a nameless voice on the phone. By night, I was an architect, building a complex digital edifice from the ground up. I poured every ounce of my remaining energy into the algorithm. It became my obsession, my confidant, my entire social life. The loneliness was a palpable thing. There were weeks when the only person I spoke to face was the cashier at the corner grocery store. My diet consisted primarily of instant noodles, eggs, and cheap coffee. Luxuries were things like buying a brand-name ketchup or turning the heat up an extra degree in the winter. My family, of course, was aware of my Spartan existence, and they viewed it with a kind of morbid fascination. The phone calls from my mother, Sharon, were the worst. They came every Sunday, like clockwork. "Elena, honey, how are you?" she'd begin, her voice bright and brittle. "I'm good, Mom, busy, working hard." "Working on your little project?" she'd ask, the condescension barely veiled. "That's nice, but are you working hard at your real job? Are you saving? You know, your brother Kyle just put a down payment on a beautiful condo downtown. The view is just spectacular." Every conversation was a comparison, a subtle reminder of how I was failing to meet their standards. They never asked for details about my algorithm. They didn't want to understand the breakthroughs I was making in predictive analysis or the elegance of the machine learning model I was training. They just wanted to know if I had given up yet. "Have you met anyone?" was her other favorite question. "It's not good to be alone all the time. There's a nice young man at your father's firm, an accountant, very stable. Maybe we could set something up." The implication was clear. My ambition was an unattractive, unfeminine trait. My true purpose should be to find a stable man to take care of me. The fact that I was trying to build something that would allow me to take care of myself was completely lost on them. There were moments of profound doubt, nights when I'd stare at thousands of lines of code, a bug somewhere in the system mocking me, and the weight of it all would feel crushing. I'd think about their words, about Kyle's easy success, about the warm, comfortable life I could have if I just gave up and followed their script. During one particularly dark week, a critical flaw in my core logic had set me back months. The server overheated, and I lost a huge chunk of data that wasn't properly backed up. I sat on my lumpy mattress, my head in my hands, the smell of burnt electronics hanging in the air. I was exhausted, broke, and felt utterly defeated. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's number. For a fleeting moment, I just wanted to hear her say, "Come home, it's okay, you tried." But then I remembered her face that day, the cool dismissal in her eyes. I remembered my father's sigh of disappointment and Kyle's snickering. The thought of admitting defeat to them, of proving them right, was more painful than any setback. Their disbelief had become my fuel. Their mockery was the wall I was determined to smash through. I didn't make the call. Instead, I spent the next 72 hours rewriting code, salvaging what I could, and rebuilding the system to be stronger and more resilient than before. The crisis forced me to innovate, to create fail-safes and redundancies I hadn't considered. In a strange way, the near disaster made the entire project better. I stopped talking to my family about my work altogether. When they asked, I'd give vague, one-word answers. Our calls became shorter, the distance between our worlds growing wider with every passing day. They were busy celebrating Kyle's latest commission, his new car, his high society girlfriend. I was busy building my empire in the dark, one line of code at a time. They thought I was stagnating in a dead-end job and a sad little apartment. They had no idea I was on the verge of changing my entire world. They had written me off so completely that they never even thought to look at what I was writing. The breakthrough didn't come with a lightning strike or a sudden, dramatic eureka. It arrived quietly, on a Tuesday morning at 3:17 a.m. I had been running a full-scale simulation for days, feeding the algorithm a year's worth of real-world logistics data from a publicly available dataset. I was testing its predictive capabilities against what had actually happened. I watched the final lines of the output scroll across my screen. The system had processed millions of data points, and now it was rendering its conclusions. My code was predicting shipping delays, identifying supply chain bottlenecks, and suggesting inventory reallocations with an accuracy that was, according to the final analysis, 98.7% correct. It had not only identified the problems that had occurred, but it had predicted them weeks in advance. It worked. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. My apartment was silent except for the low hum of the server. There was no one to high-five, no one to call. The victory was mine and mine alone. A slow smile spread across my face, and then a laugh bubbled up, a real, uninhibited laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. I had done it. Against all odds, against all the doubt and ridicule, I had built something extraordinary. That feeling of triumph carried me for the next few months, which were a whirlwind of a different kind of work. I polished the user interface, wrote exhaustive documentation, and filed for a provisional patent. Then came the terrifying part, trying to sell it. I started small, sending cold emails to mid-sized logistics companies. Most went unanswered. The few meetings I did land were disheartening. I was a 29-year-old woman with no track record, trying to sell a complex piece of software from a laptop in a coffee shop. I was met with skepticism and condescension. One executive patted me on the head, literally patted me on the head, and said, "That's a very impressive school project, dear. Come back when you have some real-world experience." The old wounds throbbed with each rejection. The voices of my family echoed in my ears. "It's a what-if, a little project. You live in a world of theory." But this time, something was different. I had the data. I had the proof. My belief in my work was no longer a desperate hope, it was a certainty. Frustrated with the direct approach, I shifted my strategy. I wrote a white paper on my methodology and submitted it to a major tech conference. It got accepted. I used the last of my savings to fly to San Francisco and present my work. My presentation was in a small side room, scheduled at the same time as a keynote from a famous tech CEO. I expected an audience of 5 people. Instead, the room was packed. My paper had generated a quiet buzz among the industry's top engineers. They weren't executives in suits, they were people like me, people who spoke the language of code. After my presentation, I was surrounded. Among the people who came to speak to me was a senior vice president from a company called Axiom Logistics, one of the largest shipping and supply chain corporations in the world. A week later, I was in their gleaming corporate headquarters, sitting in a boardroom that was probably bigger than my entire apartment. This time, I wasn't just meeting with one executive. I was meeting with the whole team, the chief technology officer, the chief financial officer, and a handful of their top engineers. They had already run their own tests on my algorithm. They had thrown everything they had at it, and they were, in a word, stunned. The meeting was intense and technical. They grilled me for hours, but this was a conversation I was born to have. This was my native language. Finally, the CFO, a stern-looking woman named Ms. Davies, folded her hands on the polished table. "Ms. Elena," she said, her voice formal, "your work is revolutionary. It has the potential to save our company hundreds of millions of dollars a year." I held my breath. This was it. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. "We are prepared to make you an offer. We don't want to license your software. We want to acquire it outright. The code, the patent, everything." My eyes dropped to the paper. I read the number once, then twice, certain that my sleep-deprived brain was misreading the commas. It was. Printed in crisp, black ink was the number: $2,800,000. My mind went completely blank. The sounds in the room faded to a low hum. $2.8 million. The number was so vast, so abstract, it didn't feel real. It was the stuff of lottery tickets and game shows, not something that could happen to the girl in the basement apartment. I thought of the $5,000 I had begged for. I thought of the ramen noodles, the credit card debt, the condescending pats on the head. I must have been silent for too long, because Ms. Davies raised an eyebrow. "Is the offer not to your liking?" I found my voice a weak, reedy sound. "No," I croaked, clearing my throat. "No, it's fine." The rest of the process was a blur of lawyers, contracts, and signatures. A week later, I logged into my online banking portal, the same portal I used to anxiously check if I had enough to cover my electric bill. And there it was. The balance read, $2,800,047.12. My old balance of $47.12, now with an 8-figure comma planted firmly in front of it. Didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the number on the screen. The overwhelming feeling wasn't excitement or even happiness. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of validation. The money wasn't the victory. The money was just the proof. It was the scoreboard. It was the world finally, unequivocally, admitting that I was right. The first thing I did wasn't to buy a car or a house. I walked to the fancy grocery store a few blocks away, the one I always hurried past, and I bought a small, ridiculously expensive pint of artisanal sea salt caramel ice cream. I went home, sat on my lumpy mattress, and ate the entire thing with a plastic spoon. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. In the age of the internet, a $2.8 million acquisition by a company like Axiom Logistics doesn't stay secret for long. A small article appeared first, on a niche tech industry blog. Then, a local business journal picked it up, running a feature with the headline, "Local Coder Turns Algorithm into Gold." They even used the photo from my conference badge, a grainy, sleep-deprived image of me that my mother would have called unflattering. I had thought about how I would tell my family. I'd imagined a dramatic reveal, a moment of triumphant vindication. But in the end, they found out the same way everyone else did. The first call was from my mother. I was in the middle of apartment hunting, real apartment hunting, this time, when my phone buzzed with her name. I let it go to voicemail, my heart pounding. I wasn't ready. But she called back immediately. And then a third time. With a deep breath, I answered. "Elena, darling, I saw the news. Why didn't you tell us?" Her voice was a cascade of artificial excitement, pitched an octave higher than usual. It was her talking to the neighbor's voice. "It all happened pretty fast," I said, my tone flat. "Oh, it's just incredible. 2.8 million. We are just so proud of you. Your father and I were just saying last night, we always knew you had it in you. You were always so determined, so focused on those computers of yours. We knew it would lead to something special." The hypocrisy was so blatant, so shameless, it was almost breathtaking. "We always knew you had it in you." I thought of her telling me to fix my face, of her pitying looks and dismissive sighs. Did she really not remember, or did she just choose not to? "Really," I said, a dangerous edge to my voice. "That's not how I remember it." There was a brief, tense pause on her end. "Oh, don't be silly, dear," she trilled, quickly recovering. "Parents are supposed to worry, we just wanted you to have a balanced life. But we are so thrilled. We have to celebrate, we'll have a big family dinner. We'll invite everyone." The calls didn't stop. An hour later, my brother Kyle called. "Allie, hey, heard you hit the jackpot," he said, his voice oozing a forced, brotherly camaraderie I hadn't heard in years. "Listen, we should totally catch up. I've got some amazing investment opportunities in the real estate market right now. With your capital and my expertise, we could make a killing." My capital, his expertise. The dynamic was already set in his mind. I was the bank, and he was the brains. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Then came the email from my father. It was short, with the subject line, "Thinking of you." The body of the email contained only a link to the website for a luxury car manufacturer. Below it, he had written, "Figured you might be in the market for an upgrade. Ha ha. Love, Dad." It was a tidal wave of fake praise and sudden, intense interest. After years of being the family ghost, I was suddenly the most popular person they knew. They didn't see me, Elena, the person who had twalled in obscurity. They saw a dollar sign. They saw a solution. Because woven into their sudden affection were the first, subtle hints of their desperation. During one of her gushing phone calls, my mother let something slip. "And it's just such a blessing, this news," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Things have been a little tight lately. With your father's company doing restructuring, you know what that means, and Kyle's market being so unpredictable." A quick search online confirmed it. My father's company had just announced a major round of layoffs in his division. And a glance at Kyle's social media showed that his usual feed of sold signs and celebratory champagne toasts had been replaced by vague, motivational quotes about weathering the storm and the comeback being stronger than the setback. The confident real estate mogul was gone, replaced by a man trying to project strength he no longer had. The pieces started to click into place. Their praise wasn't just opportunistic, it was strategic. They weren't just celebrating my success, they were circling it like vultures. They were buttering me up for the eventual ask. The family dinner to celebrate was no longer a suggest. It was a summons. I knew what was coming. I knew it as surely as I knew the logic of my own code. For a moment, I considered just disappearing. Changing my number, moving to another city, and leaving them to deal with their own self-made problems. It was a tempting thought. But then I thought of the 16-year-old girl, standing in her living room, being told her face was more important than her mind. I thought of the college student, proposal in hand, being told her dream was throwing good money after bad. I owed it to that girl to see this through. I had won the war quietly, on my own terms. But the final battle had to be fought face to face. I had to let them make their move, and I had to be the one to say, checkmate. "Okay, Mom," I said, the next time she called about the dinner. "I'll be there." I drove to my parents' house in a rental car, a sensible sedan, not the luxury vehicle my father had suggested. I had moved out of my basement apartment and into a clean, bright, and completely empty new condo, but I hadn't bought any new furniture yet, let alone a new car. The truth was, the money still felt like someone else's. It sat in my bank account, a monumental, intimidating number that had yet to translate into any real change in my habits. Pulling into the familiar driveway, I saw that my parents had gone all out. The porch lights were on, and through the big bay window, I could see the dining room table was set with the good china, the plates and silverware usually reserved for Christmas and Thanksgiving. It was an elaborate stage, set for the final act of their play. When I walked in, they descended upon me like I was a visiting celebrity. My mother, Sharon, enveloped me in a cloud of expensive perfume, her hug tight and proprietary. "Elena, you look wonderful," she exclaimed, holding me at arm's length. "See, a little success agrees with you." My father, Robert, shook my hand, then pulled me in for an awkward, back-patting hug. "We're so proud, Pumpkin," he said, his voice thick with a sincerity that felt rehearsed, just bursting with pride. Kyle was leaning against the doorway, a practiced, casual smile on his face. "There's the millionaire," he said, raising his glass. "Good to see you, sis." The air was thick with forced joviality. They steered me into the dining room, where a lavish meal was laid out. Roast chicken, potatoes, all my old favorites. It was a calculated performance of a happy family, a desperate attempt to rewind time and pretend the last 15 years of mockery and neglect had never happened. We made it through the soup and most of the main course with excruciating small talk. They asked me about my new apartment, about Axiom logistics, about my plans. They listened with rapt attention, nodding and smiling, their eyes gleaming with an avaricious light. They weren't listening to me, they were assessing their asset. Finally, as my mother was clearing the plates, my father cleared his throat. The moment had arrived. The smiles vanished, replaced by carefully arranged expressions of solemn gravity. "Elena," he began, folding his hands on the table, "there's something we need to discuss with you, as a family." Sharon sat back down, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Your father has had some difficult news at work," she said softly. "His position was eliminated after 30 years with the company." Kyle sighed dramatically, staring down at his plate. "And the real estate market has just collapsed," he chimed in. "I took a few risks, big ones, thinking the boom would last. I'm over-leveraged." The trap was sprung. They laid it all out, a litany of financial woes. Robert's severance was meager. Kyle was facing multiple lawsuits from angry investors and was on the verge of bankruptcy. Their combined debts, including the mortgage on this very house, were astronomical. They were facing foreclosure. Ruin. They let the weight of their confession hang in the air for a moment before Sharon delivered the final, expected blow. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a neatly typed list of their debts, with a grand total circled at the bottom. It was a staggering number, but still only a fraction of my net worth. "We know this is a lot to ask," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I pulled it back. "But you're our daughter, you're our family, we're in trouble and you're in a position to help. It's your duty to help us." It wasn't a request. It was a demand wrapped in the language of familial obligation. They hadn't just invited me to dinner, they had presented me with an invoice for my own upbringing. They truly believed they were entitled to my success. They saw my money not as something I had earned, but as a stroke of luck for the entire family, a lottery ticket I was selfishly holding onto. I looked at the list. I looked at their 3 expectant faces, a trio of hope-if. All vultures waiting for their meal. The silence stretched on. In their minds, my acceptance was a foregone conclusion. How could their daughter, their own flesh and blood, possibly say no? A strange calm settled over me. All the anger, all the hurt I had carried for years, seemed to coalesce into a single point of cold, hard clarity. The 16-year-old girl crying in her room, the college student with her rejected proposal, the young woman eating ramen noodles alone in her basement, they were all here with me at this table. And they were all waiting for me to speak. I slowly, deliberately, folded their list of debts into a neat square and pushed it back to the center of the table. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room like a thunderclap. The word hung in the air, sharp and absolute. 3 faces stared back at me in stunned disbelief. It was as if I had spoken in a foreign language they couldn't comprehend. My father, Robert, was the first to find his voice, a sputtering, confused sound. What do you mean no?" "I mean no," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I will not be paying your debts." My mother, Sharon, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Elena, this isn't a joke. We're talking about losing our home. Your brother is talking about bankruptcy. This is serious." "I am being serious," I said, my gaze steady. "I understand the gravity of your situation perfectly." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't need to look at it. The words were etched into my memory. "You know, it's funny you brought a list, because I've been making a list of my own for years." I looked directly at my mother. I remember being 16 years old, so proud of a piece of code I'd written and being told, Fix your face, not computers. No one is going to care how clever you are if they can't stand to look at you. That's on my list. Sharon flinched, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. She remembered. My gaze shifted to my father. I remember presenting you with a detailed, 10-page business plan and asking for a $5,000 loan, an investment in my future. You told me it was throwing good money after bad. A week later, you invested 10 times that amount in a car for Kyle because image is important. That's on my list. Robert's face went pale. He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. Finally, I looked at Kyle. I remember every joke, every snide comment at family dinners about Allie and her weird hobby. I remember you telling our entire family I liked to argue with the toaster when I tried to explain what I was studying. I remember you taking their money and their praise without a second thought, while I worked a minimum wage job to pay for my own textbooks. Kyle's smug expression had dissolved into a sullen, angry pout. "That's not fair," he mumbled. "That was just joking around. We were kids." "I wasn't a kid when I asked for that loan," I shot back, my voice like ice. "I was an adult with a viable idea that you all dismissed as a waste of time. That weird hobby you mocked just made me a multimillionaire. The good money after bad you refused to invest. The return on that $5,000 would have solved all your problems today 100 times over. But you didn't invest. You didn't believe." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "For my entire life, you have made it abundantly clear that my passions were worthless and my ambitions were a joke. You taught me, through years of ridicule and neglect, that I was on my own. You actively discouraged the very work that has now become your only hope. You cannot mock the builder and then demand the keys to the castle when it's finished. You don't get to do that." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The performance was over. The masks were off. My mother was the one who broke. Her face, which a moment ago had been a mask of concerned motherhood, twisted into a snarl of pure, undiluted rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "After everything we've done for you, we gave you a home, we fed you, we clothed you. And this is the thanks we get? You hoard your money while your family suffers. You've always been a selfish, ungrateful child." The old insults, the familiar weapons, were brought out once more. But this time, they had no power. They bounced off the armor I had spent a lifetime forging. "You gave me a house, not a home," I said calmly. "A home is a place of support and encouragement. This was just a stage for your perfect family play, and I was never cast in the right role." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You taught me a valuable lesson," I said, looking at each of them one last time. "You taught me to be completely, utterly self-reliant, and for that I am genuinely grateful. So now I'm giving you the opportunity to live by the same principles. You're on your own. Be independent." I turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't run. I walked calmly through the living room, past the family photos on the mantelpiece, all of them featuring a smiling, confident Kyle and a slightly awkward, peripheral me. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night air. I didn't look back. As I closed the door behind me, I heard the sound of my mother screaming my name, a shriek of thwarted entitlement. The sound didn't hurt me. It set me free. Driving away from that house for the last time felt like shedding a heavy skin. The weight that had been on my shoulders for decades was gone. There was a sense of loss, yes, the loss of a family I never truly had, but it was overshadowed by an immense, overwhelming sense of peace. In the weeks that followed, I received a barrage of angry texts, tearful voicemails, and emails from flying monkey relatives telling me I was tearing the family apart. I blocked their numbers and deleted their messages without reading them. Their reality was no longer my concern. The money's greatest gift wasn't the things it could buy. It was the freedom it gave me, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to build a life on my own terms, surrounded by people who saw my mind not as a curiosity, but as an asset. I started a small foundation to provide grants to young women in STEM, funding the kinds of risky, brilliant projects that institutions often overlook. I found my family, not one of blood, but one of shared passion and mutual respect. I never found out if they lost the house. I never asked. Their story was over for me. My own was just beginning. So, for anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small for being different, for anyone who has been told their passion is a waste of time, don't let them win. Your worth is not determined by their limited vision. Build your castle. And when they come knocking on the gate, remember that you have every right to decide who you let in.